Welcome back to the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft Podcast. My name's Chris Spear, and I'm going to be your guide to enjoying the great outdoors. So today is going to be relatively different than typical. We're going to be talking about the bow drill. And I'm going to try to do my best to go ahead and describe what and how to build and put together a bow drill for your use in the great outdoors. And all this, I'm going to try to describe it as I'm reading it from these pages on this podcast. So, you know, we're going to try to do a very vividly try to do a very vivid imagery here because I'm trying to describe it. For those of you watching the video, it's going to be one way where you can actually see what I'm talking about. But for those that are not watching the video and are actually truly listening to the quote unquote podcast, you know, it's got to be different. So we're going to try to vividly describe the imagery of what we're using here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking everything strictly from the book today. And we're going to be talking straight from the pages. And I'll read a little bit, we'll discuss a little bit, and read a little bit, we'll discuss a little bit. And I'll give you my tips and tricks and techniques of what I've done in the past and what works for me. Now, notice that not everything, what I said is that what works for me. With my book, with my podcast, with everything that I do, all the videos that I outline and that I put out, I typically do that on the basis of this works for me. This is not the end all be all how to get everybody on board to doing it. It works for me, and it's what I've used to work. So if I demonstrate a tactic or some kind of skill, it's because that is the way that I have practiced it, or that is the way that I learned it, or that is the way that I use it, or that is how I have adapted it to work for me. And, you know, and that a lot of people, what I'm finding that a lot of stuff is that people are extremely vulgar, rude, and they non-understanding. They're, you know, I hate using the word tolerant because I think that's a bunch of garbage. But people are what's the word I'm trying to look for? Anyway, but people are real rude, and especially in the world of online. Once you get into the online arena, every single person is a armchair quarterback. Everybody knows all the survival skills. Everybody knows all the bushcrafting skills. And it's easy for these folks to be like, yes, I am a bushcrafter with so many years of experience and blah, blah, blah. And you did this incorrectly. You're an idiot. And they go straight to name calling. And we're seeing that now, even with political posts and politics and stuff like that, that our country and our world has shifted so far from center to, you know, they got the opposite extremes on each side. And, you know, ultimately, neither one of them's correct. Neither one of them's right. And, you know, you shouldn't put down on somebody else just because you disagree with them. You should be able to have a conversation with somebody, even though you disagree with them about a tactic or something that they did. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're moving right along. So typically when people think about starting a fire with natural materials, they picture rubbing two sticks together. And this has been indicative of fire starting for years. People believe that when it comes to starting a fire, that rubbing two sticks together is what starts the fire. The friction is what starts the fire, not the act of rubbing the two sticks together. So So whether they know it or not, the method that they're thinking of is most commonly known as the bow drill, where you're taking one stick with the bow and you're moving that stick back and forth and you're causing it to drill into a hole to create dust, which generates heat, which creates an ember or a coal. And once you know how to put everything all together, a bow drill set, and it takes a little bit of practice. It takes actually a good bit of practice, but it will allow you to start you a fire. Now, a lot of conditions apply. I know you've heard of the commercials where it's like, I know you've seen or heard these commercials talking about how some conditions apply. So it is the same situation with the bow drill. Some conditions do apply. And let's talk about some of those conditions. So first of all, you could put the most beautiful bow drill system together and it'd be amazing. Like, you're like, dude, this is going to start me a good old fire. And it is top notch. It is, everything's good to go. You split you a nice little hearth board. You made your notches. You did, your sockets. You made your spindle, your handle, your bow, and you put everything together perfectly. And then whenever you got out there, it didn't work. It was the wrong kind of wood that you used, or the humidity was extremely high, so high that you couldn't get a fire. I have actually had extremely high humidity here in South Mississippi to where you couldn't get a bow drill to work. You could not get a bow drill to work. I have had a bow drill here in South Mississippi in the middle of the summertime when it is 98% humidity outside, that it took me 3 hours to get an ember. I mean, it took 3 hours, and that's crazy. And that's a lot of exercise. And that was doing it correctly, doing it the way it's supposed to be done. It took 3 hours because the humidity was so high. Everything in the woods can be saturated. All your wood can be wet. All your tinder is going to be kind of damp. And, all these factors brought together make for a hard time starting a fire with a bow drill. So what is a bow drill? Now, for all the individuals, if you're watching this podcast and you've been into the great outdoors for a long time, you know what a bow drill is. I have no doubt that people do understand what bow drills are and what they're for. But there are going to be the individuals that do not know what a bow drill is and what the components of it are and how it's made. And so we're going to start with that aspect of someone that does not know what a bow drill is. Now, a bow drill is made up of 4 parts. It's got the hearth board, the bearing block, the spindle or the drill, and then the bow. And you want to make the hearth board and spindle from the same type of soft wood. The bearing block can be made out of hardwood or fat wood. And fat wood is a resinous wood filled with pine sap, and it's typically used to start fires. So it is ideal for this because it heats up. It's actually going to lubricate a little bit. It'll lubricate itself and cause you to be able to freely spin the spindle. And then the bow can be made from any type of wood that you wish. So we're going to find the materials. And looking for the materials, what I look for here in South Mississippi, there's several different variations of woods that you can use in South Mississippi. This is not all over the world. This is not everywhere, but the ideas and the principles are the same. So what ideas and principles I use to locate my woods here in South Mississippi will still work for you in the Southwest. It'll work for you in the Northeast. It'll work for you in Canada or anywhere in the world. With a bow drill, to find the right wood, use your knife and scrape off a little bit of the bark from a piece of wood. Now, if you can take that shaved area and you could press your thumbnail into that wood pretty hard, and then whenever you're done, it leaves an indentation of your thumbnail in that wood is typically okay to use for a bow drill. Now, if it only leaves a shallow indentation, then you found hardwood, and that's going to be, which is, it still will work for your bearing block, but it's not going to be good for your spindle or your hearthboard. I usually look for standing dead trees because the wood is generally more durable than the fallen down branches, which they're usually more prone to rot, and they've been sitting there a while, get rained on, stuff like that. Standing dead stuff is not going to be as rotten. I love using Chinese privet. Privet trees are hard. They're extremely durable, but they're also a softwood, and they actually make a very good, a very, very good bow drill. And privet trees are plentiful. They grow back. You cannot kill them. They're extremely invasive. They kill all. So true story. I have used privet to cut down. Anytime I do a demonstration of any kind of wood or anything, making stuff in the woods, I'll cut down a privet tree. And the reason why is because it's a hard wood. It's a soft wood, but it's hard enough to use for many different tools and tasks. Make tripods, beds. I mean, I made all kinds of stuff with it, bows, stuff like that. But here's the thing about the privet tree is that you can cut it down, and then the next spring where you cut it down, there's going to be 13 different stalks of a new tree. I promise you, it is so invasive and it grows so fast. And it will, when I was growing up, it was called the switch tree. That's where we went out. We got a piece of switch and mama tore our behinds up with it. And if we got in trouble, she's like, you go to the switch tree and get me a switch right now. We didn't have to go out there. I don't want to. And we'd come back with this big long piece of privet, and she'd use it to whip our tails. But the Chinese privet is an extremely invasive tree. It's really, I don't even know what it's really used for here in the States other than decoration. I believe it was like a yard tree or something to do for landscaping or something to that effect. But other than that, I really don't see why, but I like finding a piece of this privet, and I'll take that privet and I'll cut it, and I'll cut a nice little chunk out of it, and I'll make my hearthboard out of this, about this big around, split it, and make you a board about a 1/2 inch thick or so, and then there you go. So you want to find you a branch or stick that is slightly larger, 2 inches or slightly larger in diameter. Now with your knife or saw, cut it so it's the length of your forearm, the elbow to fingertips. So we're talking about from here to here, about that far. And then use a knife to cut it through, and split it. You want to split it straight down about 1 inch thick. Then use a mallet or a branch, to hammer your knife through the length of the wood. This method is called batoning. And so you're going to essentially you're making a piece of lumber. And I've had people accuse me of, yeah, right, how am I going to find a piece of planed lumber in the woods? Well, if you do it right, you can make lumber in the woods. People are so, drive me insane. So you're going to do the same thing for both sides. You're going to use your knife. You're going to shave the board down on both sides and make it nice and flat. It should now resemble a piece of lumber. Something that you could get from a lumber store. It's going to look like a board. Surprise, surprise. Now, from there, we're going to move on to the spindle. Select a branch from the tree, the same tree that you got your hearthboard from. You want this branch to be of dead wood, not of green wood. And it's going to be roughly 8 to 12 inches long, right? Now, A common method for finding a good spindle length is open your hand. So from the tip of this finger to the tip of this thumb, that is typically a good spindle length that you can use to make a spindle. Some people do real long ones. Some people do real big fat ones. Some people do, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're comfortable with, whatever you want to try, whatever you want to practice with, go ahead and do that. Using your knife, shave off all the bark and smooth out any knots and bumps. Once completed, it should look like a short, fat dowel rod on one end, and then carve the point on the other end like a pencil. And so it's going to look like a pencil and an eraser. Now that we have that done, we're going to round off and we're going to round off the end like an eraser. That's going to be the end that's going to fit into your socket. Now let's go ahead and select us a bow. Now the bow is not very difficult at all. For the bow, you need a strong stick, slightly thicker than your thumb's diameter. So a little bit bigger around than your thumb, that way it doesn't really kink up whenever you're going back and forth or anything like that. And then I prefer green saplings. A lot of people do. And often, like I said before, I use Chinese privet. Chinese privet to me, I could build every aspect of the bow drill from the Chinese privet. I can use the bearing block, I can use the hearth board, I can use the spindle, and I can make the bow. Everything out of that one tree, I can make all 4 pieces of this. So I prefer to use a green sapling, of Chinese privet, which is plentiful in South Mississippi, and it grows in nature everywhere. And they actually naturally grow in arches. And so you could do this as a bow. A bow for your bow drill doesn't have to have a bow. It'll work as a straight stick as well, But some primitive campers prefer to use a straight stick, but I always like to have a slight curve in mind. When I use a straight stick, my hands sometimes hit the spindle, my knuckles do. And so anyway, the length of your bow should be approximately 3 feet, or at least 1 arm's length, from here to, from the shoulder all the way out to your tip of your fingers. And which you can determine by measuring the distance from the top of your shoulder to your fingertips. Use paracord or tarred and twisted bait line as your bow string. I typically, and if you've watched this video for a long time, if you read my book, if you've watched my podcast, if you've watched any of my videos on YouTube, you will know that I typically use the tarred and twisted bait line. It is one of the most bang for the buck. And, I have an individual, Mr. Almond. He has been really contributing to the Facebook page. He's really been contributing to the community. And he's really took to this book, and he has been putting aspects of this book together and demonstrating it and going out and filming it and really been working with this. And actually, I talked to him the other day. I was like, hey, I need to get you on the podcast. So I'm going to be arranging that eventually and start getting individuals from the primitive camping and bushcraft community on Facebook to actually start coming on and talking about primitive camping with me on this podcast. So what I like to do with my bowstring, and this, some people are like, no, you can't do that. And I'm like, yeah, you can. So what I've done with my bowstring is I will take the end of my bow and I will cut about an inch deep slot all the way down into the bow with my saw, and I'll cut it. And then on the other side, I'll do the same thing. Now I will take my bait line, I'll put a overhand knot, slide it in there on one end, and then I'll wrap it around my spindle 2 times. I'll wrap it around twice, and then I will measure it out on there to where, okay, now I come down, I put me a knot, and then I slide it back on there and then feed it through at the top. And now my spindle will be held securely tight in the middle, and I will have made my bow. Now, once that spindle's not in there, the bow string is going to be relatively loose, but that works for me. I've done it countless times. I've done this. I've done it so many times. I've even demonstrated how to do it for certain TV shows, but you can do the same thing on both ends. You put your knot. And if you haven't checked, I'll see if I can put some photos up while I'm talking about these in here. I don't know, but we'll see. So now that you got your block, you got your spindle, you got your hearth board, and you got your bow done, it's time to make the bearing block. All right. So for the bearing block, we're going to use green hardwood, or we're going to use resinous fat wood. Resinous fat wood, as I demonstrated earlier, or discussed earlier, is a way of actually self-lubricating. As it heats up, that resin will actually lubricate, turns more into an oil the hotter it gets, and it will actually lubricate. I've watched people use green wood. The green wood, the moisture in there tends to cool the spindle down and cause it to lubricate. I've watched people actually spit in it. I've seen people put green leaves in there to use as a lubricant. But you could also use a stone or a piece of metal. This rock right here, I tried drilling a little hole right there. I didn't want to crack it or anything. It had a natural divot there, but I wanted to make it a little bit bigger. And that's actually all you need is a little small divot. And you can actually, and this would work out a little bit better than some of other methods. This one has a nice little thing right there, little hole right there, but the more you use it, the more it'll sand out. But you could use a rock with a divot as your hole. Now, there are nice knives out there that will actually do what we're talking about. These dudes are in the handle. They have in the micarta handle, they have a divot in the handle, and that divot is actually used for making these bow drills go back and forth, and for your spindles. So now for the bearing block, use green wood, resinous fat wood, blah blah blah. Your bearing block should be the width of your hand and roughly the same diameter as the stick you found for the hearth board. As if you can't tell with my voice, I'm getting over being sick, and this has been driving me nuts. All you need to do is split it down the center and use your knife to create a divot in the center of the stick. And so those are there. Now, I'll give you a piece of advice. In the book, I know I put center. And I'm not sure if that was an editing mistake or if it was a mistake on my part putting it in there. I usually do it on the second third. So you want that bearing block to be 2/3 of the way, not completely cut in center. So you got your stick right here. You don't want to cut it straight down the middle right there. You want to cut it 2/3 of the way right there, giving you more material on the handheld side for you not to burn your hand. All right. So now it's time to prepare your hearth board. And let's place your spindle on the point where you want to make your socket. Twist it a few times to leave an impression in the board. You got to remember, this is soft wood, so it's going to leave an impression where you move that socket or your spindle. Now, the socket should be slightly off center from the board and approximately 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the board. So using this as the board, you're going to be like right here. You're not going to want to be all the way in the middle of the board, because then you have to make notches and stuff like that. And we'll get into that in a bit. It does not have to have a huge hole, but rather a nice seat for the spindle to sit in. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to burn it in. We are going to, that's what it's called, the burn in process. Now it's time to for the process known as burn in. You will need something under the board to capture all the dust placed. That's called a cold catch. Now, I typically use a leaf, but you can use bark or anything else you have handy. And I don't understand. That's an editing issue right there. Wrap the bowstring around the spindle. Carefully lay the spindle against the string and twist it, and until it wraps around the spindle. Now, place 1 foot on top of the hearthboard, and this is to hold it steady. Now, with your bearing block in hand, place the spindle in the hearthboard and then start moving it back and forth. Add slightly downward pressure to the spindle via the bearing block and begin to move the bow back and forth. The goal is to mate the spindle to the socket. So you're going to slowly and steadily add pressure as you move the bowstring back and forth until you start to see smoke. And you're going to keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth till you see smoke. And once you start seeing smoke, then you have completely burnt in your bow drill. So we're going to take the hearthboard and we're going to cut a notch in the shape of a V. This notch will extend from the outer edge of the board to nearly 1/8 of an inch inside the divot that we just burned in. So we don't want it to go all the way to the center. We want it to collect the dust and fill that notch up with the dust. And then as it keeps coming back and forth, it is actually going to heat up that dust. And that dust is what actually generates the fire or generates the ember. So flip the board over and we're going to carve a V into it, All right. So we got this. Take the hearthboard, cut out a notch in the shape of a V. This notch will extend from the outer edge to about 1/8 of an inch into the divot. This step can be done with a knife, but is much easier to do with a folding saw. That's one of the reasons why I have a Leatherman with me, and I'm able to cut a notch into that board. So now we're going to flip the board over and we're going to carve an angle onto the bottom portion of the notch. We're going to cut a little bit slight angle and get rid of that 90 degree and make it more of like a 45 all the way back to the back of that V. Doing this allows more oxygen to reach the ember once it starts combusting. So here we go. Place your foot close to the socket. That's going to add stability. And we're going to repeat the process just like we would for the burn-in portion. We're going to insert the spindle into the socket and we're going to place the bearing block on top. Lean forward and you're going to lock that handhold to your shin. You're going to slowly and steadily start moving the bow, applying steady downward pressure. All right. If the string is slipping, you're adding too much pressure. Slow down, slowly move the bow back and forth until the V notch is filled with dust. You're going to just slowly, at this time, you're just taking your time. You're just filling the hole with dust. You're not trying to make smoke. You're not trying to do anything. You're just taking your dear Jesus time on this, and you're allowing this V notch to fill up with dust. And then, once it starts filling up with dust and you start seeing dust fill up in that hole, and you'll see it. And as it turns and turns and turns, it'll start filling up, and you'll see it. It's unmistakable. But once you get that thing all the way filled up, then it is time. And then it'll start compacting that stuff down. And once it starts compacting that stuff down, then it is time to start hammering down on it. Then you're going to start going faster and faster, adding a little bit of pressure as you go. And you're going to keep going back and forth and back and forth. You're going to see smoke. You just keep on going, and you just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. Now, don't stop until you see a steady stream of smoke coming from the pile of dust in the V notch. All right. Once you see the steady stream of smoke coming from it, kind of like a cigarette or kind of like a incense or something to that effect, at that point, your ember should be smoking a pretty good bit. Slowly and gently tilt the hearthboard and tap the ember and the dust out. This will allow, you'll see the ember glowing bright orange at this point. Grab your tinder bundle, take your time. It's not going anywhere. You don't have to rush anything. It is, as long as it's protected from the rain or, water, it is pretty much good to go. Grab your tinder bundle, carefully transfer the ember into your tinder bundle. This is the most critical point because a lot of people don't have it tight enough, and whenever they flip it, the ember just goes poof, and it just a million different pieces, and it goes out, and they have to start over. Raise your bundle and blow into the ember slow and steady. Blowing slowly will allow the coal to grow hotter. As you start to see some more smoke, gradually blow harder to feed the coal plenty of oxygen, allowing it to rupture into flames. When you start your fire outdoors, especially during primitive methods, it is the most gratifying and satisfying thing. And once you do a bow drill for the first time, and I'm not going to exaggerate, the first time is the most difficult, but once you do a bow drill for the first time in the great outdoors, your confidence of the great outdoors will be extremely boosted. Now, here's the difference. Boost your confidence in the outdoors. Don't over-exaggerate your confidence in the great outdoors. Just because you started a bow drill fire doesn't mean that you are now a trained assassin and you are ready for your first mission. It's not going to happen. You have created a fire for the first time. Now you have to practice again. Now it's time to practice it again. Now it is time to practice it with different materials. Now it is time to do it over and over and over until you are sick of doing it, until it becomes a second nature type habit. Then you can start working on the hand drill. I personally have not started a fire with a hand drill. I have not. The only hand drill I've used is a DeWalt with a stick in it up against, but a bow drill is the most amazing way to do a fire. Now, hand drill would be a very primitive way of doing a fire. I know several people that do. I mean, you got people online that do it all the time. Donnie Dust, and you got, Corporal's Corner has done it several times. You got Buckeye Bushcraft, Jake Trent, him. Now, there's other variations of this that we've done. You can use the same method, with a shotgun bow drill, adding the gunpowder to a hearthboard and adding heat. I know, what's his name? Ranger Fieldcraft and Survival. He does one where he heats up a piece of wire like a saw, heats it up, empties the gunpowder of a shot shell or a bullet on there, and throws that wire in there and it lights it, and there's different ways to do this. So, all right. Well, anyway, that's it for today. I really do appreciate you guys. I thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this enjoyable. I hope you found it educational. Don't forget to swing by and the links and go ahead and pick you up some of the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft Blend coffee. Also, swing by Amazon, pick you up a copy of the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft book to go along with the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft podcast and the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft group on Facebook. And so I'll see you in the next video or the next podcast. God bless you.